provocative, insightful, empowering.
Kids don't have time for us to wait to get it together. They get one shot at school. Next year might be too late.
If you're a teacher, be courageous. If you're a school board member, be courageous. Because you know who the most courageous people in the school system? The children.
And are you going to stay true to who you are and what they've hired you to do?
The moment you think you have arrived and you don't need to do anything else, you are now falling behind, and it's time to pick the pace up.
The executive session is all about building leadership within you.
Regardless of whether you're an educator, you are a minister, a government official, or CEO of a corporation.
The executive session is the session for you.
Check us out and help us help you grow so that you too can help others.
Hello, my name is J.R. Green. Alongside this phenomenal panel of leaders, Dr. Sean Foster, Dr. Gregory McCord, Dr. Baron Davis, and Dr. Aaron Bishop, where we will discuss leadership. And we keep it real, you understand. This is going to be a very intimate conversation around courageous leadership. No fluff, no cliches, just straight, unfiltered conversation about what it truly takes to lead in complex times. We're here to challenge assumptions, break down barriers, and reimagine leadership for not only today, but also for tomorrow and beyond. And so welcome, gentlemen. I thank you for joining me around this courageous conversation for our executive session. Today, we are going to start the conversation off around accountability. But it's not necessarily about accountability. It is about how we respond to accountability. You know, accountability, particularly during this hyper accountability time, that's caused us to move away from one another. As we begin to be measured against one another, the question is it in my interest for Sean and his students to do well, or is it in my interest for Sean and his students to do bad? Because that makes me look a little better. And so I want to talk about, has this hyper accountability environment caused us to see ourselves more as competitors and less as collaborators? You know, at one point in time, the teacher who taught Algebra 1 wanted to see the teacher across the hall who was also teaching Algebra 1. I want to see you do good, because when you do good, we all do good. But when you incentivize a system where I reward you if you do better than that person, do you want to see that teacher do as well as you? And I use that same example as I talk about schools. Do we now find ourselves where schools see themselves as competing against one another? Do we now find ourselves where now districts see themselves as competing against one another? And Brother McCord, me and you have had some conversations about that in the past about are we competitors or are we collaborators? And can our system really be the best that it can be if we have a system that views itself as only competitors and never collaborators? And so when I have a good idea, I need to keep that idea to myself so I can flourish. But I don't want to share that idea because it may make someone else flourish.
Yeah,
I will start that off with Brother McCord. Since me and you had this conversation earlier, Greg, about are we competitors? You know, I pushed back on that characterization over the years, but I want you to kind of talk about your perspective on competitors or collaborators.
I think you can be both. I think you can be competitive as well as be collaborative. And what I mean by that is I've always looked at myself as one who wants to do well for the people that I'm in front of, that I'm serving. I think that's no different than a parent who wants to do well in front of their kids. But I also believe that I only get better by collaborating with those that I might consider to be better than, if not the best, to do something in front of me. I think everyone on this panel, with the exception of Bishop, can agree. I didn't have a problem calling and asking you how you were doing things. And part of leadership is understanding that there's nothing wrong with asking for help. If the help is going to help the people that you're in charge of helping, then it's good help. There's also nothing wrong with acknowledging that you're in competition. Whether you want to believe it or not, you're in competition with everyone that's doing what you're doing, whether it be charter schools or private schools or the local public school down the street or around the corner from you. We're all in competition. You talked about teachers. There was a time when teachers wanted to see us all excel. I used to tell my teachers and staff when I was a classroom teacher, I would tell the teachers with me, hey, I want to learn as much from you as I can so I can take it and give it to my kids, because I want my kids to be smarter than yours. Now, all I was saying is, as my kids get smarter, our kids get smarter. So my competitive nature, JR, when I talk to you, because we always competed. One of the hardest things I heard from someone that I was trying to collaborate with was Baron Davis at a State Department meeting one day, and they were giving out awards for school districts. And I was standing and I was looking for something to come in my way. And Baron looked over at me with a little smirk and said, you can stop looking. You're not getting anything. Now, that hurt me, Baron. That hurt me to my heart because you had an arm full of awards and accolades, but I didn't shy away from that. I just said, we may not have any today, but we'll have some tomorrow, because I'm coming home with you to find out exactly what you're doing. So, JR, I think we can be competitive as collaborators, and I think that makes us courageous, as opposed to always believing that we have to do something on our own. And Baron,
Greg,
I never forgot that. I never forgot that, Baron. I'm saying
before I bring
my
my good friends in on this conversation, I push back on that a bit, Greg. And I would say, if we are truly competitors, I don't see it in my interest to help you. When you say, well, you didn't mind calling me and asking me about what I was doing. No, I would, if I truly saw you as a competitor, I'm trying to hoard what I'm doing. If I got something that's working, pardon me?
That's selfish living. And
well, but that's why I don't believe that.
It may be a difference
that's why I don't believe
in organizations, but where I come from, we believe in unselfish living. But go ahead.
but that's exactly my point, Greg. I never saw other superintendents as my competitors. I never saw other principals as my competitors. My goal was to maximize the academic and personal potential of all of my children, irregardless of what you did with yours. And you know what? I want you to maximize the academic and personal potential of all of your children. So I never looked at it, at least from my perspective, as a zero-sum game. I need to be better, and in order for me to be better, you got to be worse. Whenever we start ranking,
no. That's not what I said, JR. That's not what I said.
I didn't say you said that. I didn't say you said that. But I want to be clear. Whenever we start ranking and sorting schools, that is an inevitable response. That is an inevitable response as people begin to look at it through the lens of, well, I don't want to be number 10, so I'm not trying to help Greg do better, because he might be number 10 if I don't help him. Now, I'm not saying people are using you specifically, but I think that has been a very negative aspect of what this hyper accountability environment has caused. I personally think it has caused much less collaboration because people see themselves as competitive. But Sean, you wanted to add something to that.
So I'll tell you this: we talk about accountability. I want to speak on that, because accountability is oftentimes confused when it comes to systems with assessment. So everything in South Carolina and most school districts, the accountability system is based off of what? How students perform on what? The assessment. So if you go back to the history of tests, we're misled, or we're told to believe that the test they're there to gauge how well a student has mastered content. Correct? That's why they take the test. See if they've mastered it. But in essence, the true essence of a test, if you take the SAT, for instance, that is supposed to gauge success in first year in college, and it has no real correlation, the irony of it is the true use of an assessment, if we're going to call it and have a courageous conversation, it's a socially acceptable way to discriminate, to keep people from having access to certain things. If you don't score this on the SAT, then you can't go to this school. Because brothers, they're out. I'm not proud of it. I did okay. I have a bachelor's degree, 2 master's degrees, and a doctorate that I got by the age of 27, and I had a 705 on the SAT. I ain't supposed to be sitting here.
You
But
won't be after
when you talk
disclosing that
about
information.
you talk about the accountability of certain things, the reality is the accountability systems are based off an assessment, which is designed to socially acceptable way to discriminate. That's what it's about. It doesn't gauge success. If that was the case, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
So I mean, we
Stop
talk about
yelling out
accountability.
705.
So hey, listen, I'll take my 705 because I know a lot of 1600s that ain't doing too well. So, but
705 don't measure grit and determination, right? And resilience.
that right there.
All those intangible things that help you become successful.
So that's the accountability piece. But I do believe that you have to have a level of collaboration and competition, because iron sharpens iron.
Yeah.
So I think it has to be a good balance of both. That's my take on it when I was listening to it. But it goes back to the accountability system, and everything is based off an assessment, which I believe people have a misinterpretation of what that assessment is used for.
You know, Sean, before I know Barry got some things he want to chime in, I'm gonna just give you all a little historical fact that a lot of people don't know. University of South Carolina required the SAT as a condition of enrollment 2 weeks after the passage of the ruling of Brown versus Board of Education. 2 weeks after that monumental decision is when the University of South Carolina decided to require SAT as a condition of enrollment. And before then, enrollment was based strictly on high school transcript. It was done with the explicit purpose, and this is not conjecture, this is factual. It was done with the explicit purpose of a legal way to keep people of color out of the university. Now, that's just fact.
Yeah, you're mixing oranges now. We were talking about competitiveness versus collaborative.
I'm responding to what Sean said relative to keep using assessments to keep people from opportunities. So I'm responding specifically to what he said. I'm gonna get back to what the topic was, but that was in response to what Sean mentioned. But Barry, you wanted to add something.
I was just thinking, I mean, that's a great question about whether or not we're collaborators or competitors. And I mean, I definitely think Greg's sentiment resonates with me, but I think differently in the sense that I do believe we should be collaborators. And I think for the most part, we are collaborators. But I have, and so have you all, have in this field particularly have been experienced where you've reached out to folk and they definitely saw you as competition and refused to collaborate with you. I think it's like I liken it to like playing golf. You play the course that you were on, and so whether that course is in Orangeburg, Fairfield, or Richland, you're playing your course, and internally you are being competitive with yourself. You're trying to improve every time you step up on the course to the tee box. You want this round to be better than the last round. So every year when you step back up to the tee box as the leader, whether it's in your classroom or whether you run a bus route, whatever it is, I hope that you have enough internal competitiveness that you want to be better. And I hope that doesn't disqualify you, or you take that as a reason why you should not collaborate. So I see this both. I think with the accountability system, though, what I have the problem with is the fact that how the accountability system doesn't take into consideration those factors that we know impact student performance. And my biggest challenge with the accountability system is the labeling of schools when you know that these conditions impact student academic success and performance. And then we arbitrarily or we systematically or we make the decision, as when I say we, I mean those who are in the position to determine the accountability system, to leave out other factors that would actually demonstrate that this school is a high performing, healthy learning environment for students. And so the expectation for a student who is experiencing poverty to in some way perform at the exact same level of a student who come from a family of affluence is an unfair and unrealistic expectation. And it doesn't mean that it can't happen, because it has happened. But those students are often outliers in the case where they may come from extreme impoverished conditions and they can perform just as well as a student who comes from an extremely affluent position. The other factor that it doesn't take into consideration is the attractive, because of the accountability system, how that hurts the attractiveness of certain schools. And so you don't get veteran teachers. And so there's always this assumption like a 20-year teacher and a first-year teacher are some sort of way have the same level of experience in the craft. And it don't. So if you got a school full of first, second, third, fifth year teachers, and there's a revolving door, versus a school that has 75% of their teaching staff has 15 to 20 years of experience, you have to give some sort of account to that. But the expectation is that the students in the first year teachers class should perform the same as the student in the 20-year veteran teacher class. And even if those students are different, when I say different from their experiences of upbringing, whether they're impoverished or they have a learning disability or they have other challenges that impede their learning experience, the accountability system really doesn't take that type of stuff into consideration. It just wants to give you a label as either a excellent school or a unsatisfactory school. And we all know now, as this bar moves and more schools are no longer going to be identified as excellent, we'll see the model change, because that's going to impact home values, attractiveness of communities, businesses located in those communities, and then it becomes an economics thing as well. And then we will see the continual modification and adjustment of that system. That's what I have a problem with when it comes to the accountability system.
Provocative, insightful, empowering.
Kids don't have time for us to wait to get it together. They get one shot at school. Next year might be too late.
If you're a teacher, be courageous. If you're a school board member, be courageous, because you know who the most courageous people in the school system? The children.
And are you going to stay true to who you are and what they've hired you to do?
The moment you think you have arrived and you don't need to do anything else, you are now falling behind, and it's time to pick the pace up.
The executive session is all about building leadership within you.
Regardless of whether you're an educator, you are a minister, a government official, or CEO of a corporation.
The executive session is the session for you.
Check us out and help us help you grow so that you too can help others.
Let me go back to something. I'm going to go back to where we started, and that was competitiveness versus being collaborative. I joked about Barron on the front end a moment ago and some comments that he made that I didn't appreciate. But I also want to say that I also want to acknowledge that although Barron and I have always been fiercely competitive, I remember when Barron gave me a call to let me know about a job that was opening up in another district, because he thought I might be able to benefit by applying for the job. I at the time was doing a job that I was happy doing, but I think just the idea that he stopped what he was doing to send some information to me and share some information with me, let me know that although we're in competition with one another, we still have a mutual respect for one another where we can collaborate. And I say this, JR, when you talk about hoarding ideas or not sharing ideas freely, when you look at the top athletes today, during the off season, when they practice, who do you think they seek to practice with? They seek to practice with the best. The same individuals that they're in competition with night in and night out during the season, they seek to practice with them. And there's a reason for that. That reason is so that they can get better in their craft. That's just my thought.
Greg, that's a false analogy, Greg. So that's a false analogy. So obviously the Eagles competed against the Eagles competed against the Chiefs last night. There had to be a winner and there had to be a loser. There didn't have to be a winner and a loser in relation to educating children. So that's a false analogy. And so and
there you go, mix the things up again.
But that's exactly what you said. When you talk about athletes and competing, there has to be a winner or a loser in a basketball game. There has to be a winner or a loser in a football game.
JR, Barron recommended Greg because he said he knew he could beat him. That's why he recommended for that job. So that's a strategy too. So I'm just letting you know.
So I'm gonna turn it on over to Bishop after Greg.
Y'all done read G off the call, man. Y'all put G out of executive session, man. Y'all just put him out of executive session.
And now he's back. But Greg, before I turn it over to Bishop, and I think this is, I appreciate Barry giving the golf analogy, because I am an extremely competitive person. So I don't want anyone to get confused. The only point is, I'm not competing against Barry. I'm competing against the standard that I set.
Yes,
I'm not competing against Greg. I'm competing against the standard that I set. So for me, I don't get any pleasure on being better than Greg or being better than Barron. I get pleasure out of being better than the standard that I set. So it isn't contingent on. Well, I'm telling you what I'm saying. So when I say
make it
competitor
clear
or collaborator, I'm talking about, do you see other people as your competitor? And the example you gave, Greg, obviously, when the Bulls play the Lakers, they are competing against one another because somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. When we start talking about educating children, nobody has to, at least I hope nobody has to win and somebody has to lose. But you
that's
hold
not
on
what
that,
we started
Greg.
off talking
Hold on a second. Bishop is patiently waiting to chime in on this, and I'm gonna get back to you.
Hey, man, the thing I got to point out again, because I am a Tupac fan, and I'm a little offended that Barron has Biggie behind him, man. Listen, we knew back in the day that Biggie and Pac had that competitive spirit in hip-hop, right? And that's what it comes down to. Competition is healthy. And guess what? It still is true today. Why do you think the world is still talking about the Super Bowl? No one is mentioning about the Eagles. No one is mentioning about the Chiefs. They all are talking about K. Lamar. K. Lamar crushed Drake on the main stage. The game wasn't on the field. It was in the halftime experience. So I say all to say this, man. Competition is healthy, but it also speaks to teamwork making the dream work. People will always know that the team has, hey, Greg, we got to vote you out of executive session if you keep over talking people, bro. Okay. What I'm saying is, do you and I'll do me, right? We got to all be accountable to those responsibilities. And I agree with JR. I'm doing my part so I can be the iron that sharpens your iron, right? I got to make sure that scripture lives inside of our schools. And so when I look at the game that I bring to the board as a board member, I want to be influential. I want to make sure I shape policy. I want to make sure my community has proper representation, because what it comes down to in the accountability that we're talking about is, how are you being represented? How are you performing? How is your school district showing up with this level of hyper accountability? Like we always looked at Richland too. We always looked at Fairfield. Every time they brought information to us, we were always breaking down the numbers, but we also made sure that we were comparing apples to apples. We had to look at the poverty index. We had to look at the poverty number because we can't necessarily always say that we're competing with a district that's urban, suburban, and rural. That's what we are as a district. And so when you look at what is the test performance of one community versus the growth of one community, those things got to make sure they equal. They are reconciling because when you look at all of the things they're measuring us for, well, if I'm competing with you, are we running the same race? Are we on the same track? Are we in the same field? Right? And that's what it comes down to with this level of hyper accountability in our community now. And I tell you this, one of the things I would tell you that we did courageously, because we start talking about storytelling, things that comes from the field. You're right. In one particular community, the kids got a head start, literally. They're literally going to school earlier than the kid from another community who's staying with Big Mama. Okay? That child who stays with Big Mama gets a good meal, gets a lot of love. They are being raised with social influence from that culture, right? Well, the other kid is probably getting the same thing, but they're getting sight words to know. They're getting ready for kindergarten. They're getting that head start. And then the experience from the field that we had to face is that in Belvedere, where I grew up from, and I grew up in a community right off Two Notch Road. It's called Belvedere. Those children had one teacher with over 31 students in the classroom. It was ridiculous. They were not giving the advantage to be able to even get ready for a test or even any assessment because you're not teaching all the children in a classroom with one teacher, 31 students. But in the other side of town, there was one teacher with 8 students. So what did we do? We tried to balance it out so we can make sure when the tests come or any assessment come, we can compare apples to apples. Well, that really stirred up a lot of people. Stirred up a lot of people all the way from one community all the way to the state house. But we did it because we want to do right by children. We wanted children at the end of the day to grow and learn. And when they get to a place where we do an assessment on their growth, that we can say, yeah, we're comparing apples to apples. So, but that's my take on it, man.
So JR,
Greg, you obviously got some things that you wanna chime in. You
No.
with my.
I know Greg's done a good job of chiming in.
I disagree.
You obviously disagree.
We can agree to disagree.
Yeah.
So can I ask you, JR?
But I think if we are really honest and take an objective look about schools over the last couple of decades, I think we'll see that you have much less collaboration among principals. You got much less collaboration among superintendents. I mean, you got much less collaboration because people see themselves as in competition with one another.
Much less where, JR? I gotta jump in.
Much less where? Much less everywhere. Much less everywhere.
Then you have to specify where, because when you say that, and I said we can agree to disagree, but now I have to come in and disagree again because I don't necessarily see that in all situations. I see situations where people do collaborate and do continue
much less. I said much less. I didn't say nobody collaborates.
They collaborate. There's a segment of our population that collaborates well. We tend to believe that we can't collaborate because we might be viewed as less competent than the other. So let's jump into this hidden tax part because I think there's some things that we levy on ourselves as Black leaders that don't necessarily resonate with others. And I know I might be out of line for saying this, but I think sometimes we're a hindrance to ourselves because of that idea that we don't need to collaborate because we might be in competition.
Greg, what when you say our, you said our a few times. Please tell me who our is. That's just so that I'm clear in what it is you're saying. So we can respond. You said our 4 times.
Our
what is
us?
Who's us? Who's us?
Blacks.
Oh,
Black
okay. I just wanted to make sure.
That's black leaders.
So are you saying blacks don't? Blacks don't
no.
collaborate.
I said no. I said we sometimes do not collaborate for fear of competition. And that's where I think we fall short. Someone mentioned a moment ago, reaching out to others. Let me just say it this way. I think Bishop mentioned something about working with boards. Boards collaborate with one another. Leaders collaborate because you have all these summits, you have all these conferences, you have all these meetings where everyone comes from different places to talk and discuss and to share. So why do we levy it against ourselves that we can't collaborate as well as be in competition with one another?
Provocative, insightful, empowering.
Kids don't have time for us to wait to get it together. They get one shot at school. Next year might be too late.
If you're a teacher, be courageous. If you're a school board member, be courageous. Because you know who the most courageous people in the school system? The children.
And are you going to stay true to who you are and what they've hired you to do?
The moment you think you have arrived and you don't need to do anything else, you are now falling behind. And it's time to pick the pace up.
The executive session is all about building leadership within you.
Regardless of whether you're an educator, you are a minister, a government official, or CEO of a corporation.
The executive session is the session for you.
Check us out and help us help you grow so that you too can help others.
So
I don't think we don't. I don't think that was what we were saying. But I mean, I know we're kind of up on a 10, but I think the question is around: does this hyper accountability era create competition over collaboration? And clearly, this hyper accountability era creates competition, more competition. It may not be, I don't know to what degree more. I couldn't quantify it. But from an anecdotal and an observation perspective, as a former superintendent, I know that my principals would look at other scores at other schools and feel like they needed to, like they were concerned if the graduation rate at one high school was higher than the graduation rate at another high school, and then they were a little less willing to talk about some of the strategies that they may have used to improve the graduation rate. They don't want to change positions. Why? Because of the hyper competitiveness of the accountability. And they did not want to be the principal of a school that was labeled a certain way. So I think the label, no one's shucking accountability. We as leaders and courageous, we want accountability. Hold us accountable. But what we don't want to be shackled with is a label when you don't take into consideration of the field or the course we're playing. So if I'm on a golf course and my course is full of rocks and sticks and the green's not smooth and there's debris on the course all the time and all those, I'm not going to shoot the same score you're going to shoot. If you're on a pristine course, you got great clubs, you got all the tools, you got a coach that's helping you, that's coaching you through things, you have more resources and availabilities than I have, your score is going to be different. And what I'm saying is the accountability model doesn't take that in consideration. If it took those things more into consideration, it may reduce the level of competitiveness and more of collaboration is what I'm saying. That's why I said you got to play your course. And so you got to be first internally competitive. As JR said, you got to wake up every day wanting to be better today than you were yesterday. And so when you sit back at the end of the year as the leader, how do we improve as a system or as a district, as an organization, as a nonprofit, as a city of Columbia? How do we improve the learning experience for our students today? This hyper competitiveness, it makes us focus on test scores. That's what it has done. We base our success of our schools pretty much solely on test scores. No one asked the question about, well, are you fostering critical thinking skills? How good are your kids at problem solving? Because you know what? I told someone this recently. You took a kid in poverty, give them a problem. They're some of the most creative problem solvers.
That's right.
And the most resilient people you will ever meet. But that ain't on a test. That is not accountability.
I don't think
now if he can't solve this equation, then the school is failing the child and the community is failing the child. That's what it's done. And that's why that's the issue and the challenge we got to deal with.
Well, Greg, I'll let you respond, Greg, but I don't see how anyone looking at it objectively could say that this hyper accountability model has resulted in less collaboration. I mean, I mean, I think anyone, and that doesn't mean that there isn't collaboration. Obviously, you and Barron collaborated, me and Sean collaborated, Bishop and Mr. Miller. I mean, so there is some collaboration. No one has suggested that there is no collaboration. But I'll tell you, this is a conversation. We had 5 elementary schools in Fairfield when I was superintendent there. And I used to tell them, y'all are not competing against one another now. Okay? I mean, we're competing against a standard that we're setting for each one of you to achieve. You ain't competing against one another no more than my children are competing against one another. Okay? So I don't look at my own biological children like, Jamal, you got to do better than Janelle. Janelle, you got to do better than Jason. So my point is that you can be competitive against a standard without seeing any individual as your competitor, because we're not a sports situation. And exactly what Barron said, I think if we're honest with ourselves, you will say, I do see less of that as a function of this hyper accountability environment. And I think that's something that we have to address, because I think when we can do more collaboration, I think we improve the system for all.
But JR, I think that it goes back to the one word. It depends on the values of that leader. Some leaders are more collaborative just because it's about if one kid fails, then even though that's not my child in my school or my district, then that's a child that failed. While others are about my children got to beat their children. But also the arrangement of collaboration is different as well, because I've seen some instances where you have high performing organizations more willing to collaborate with what they deem as another high performing organization than they would pair with one that is not as high performing, because they don't think they bring a level of value to that collaboration. It's not a mutually beneficial relationship in that regard. But also I've seen 2 schools that are districts or organizations that are struggling that are more willing to collaborate because they're both in the same circumstance. So there are a lot of different scenarios that play into the collaborative spirit or competitive spirit. And again, it goes back to the leader itself. So we can look at it. I think everybody has a valid point in their argument, but I think we have to go back to what the root of what it is we talk about: the leader, the type of leaders that are leading those organizations.
So Sean, I don't disagree that we look at leaders, but I think we got to look at systems as well. And I think we have created systems that don't value collaboration, but try to create this Hunger Games kind of a mentality, as Barron alluded, that I said earlier. If I came into school and I said, I'm going to give $1,000 bonus to the teacher that gets the best Algebra 1 scores. If I said I'm going to give $1,000 bonus to the teacher that gets the best Algebra 1 scores, do I think that would negatively impact collaboration among Algebra 1 teachers? You better believe it.
That's a whole nother conversation. And I know we're getting ready to wrap up, but that's That's a totally different scenario.
Tell me how that's a different
Well,
conversation.
I'm gonna let you wrap up. We may have to save it for the next show.
No, tell me. I want to know how it's a different conversation. Explain to me how it's a different conversation.
Because you're not talking about equal kids on equal terms. So when you set up those type of incentives, you have to level it off. It's just like Barron talking about golf, and I just so happen to be a golfer, by the way. You don't play different courses. You play the same course, but you handicap the course. So you handicap the course by playing different sets of tees. Everyone's going to play the same course. You're just on different tee boxes. So I might be black, you might be green, the other one might be red, but we're playing the same course. You can't say I'm giving $1,000 for the best algebra scores without trying to find a way to level it up. And I know you're getting ready to cut back to that, Barron, and say that's what I'm saying about accountability.
No.
I don't think that's what we're talking about.
We do play different courses. The course in Fairfield and the course in Richland County is not the same course. We're playing different courses.
But he's talking about a teacher, an incentive for teachers for best scores. So again,
but they got different kids. They got different kids.
You can't count my score on.
But they got different kids, which means they got different courses.
We have to play the same course, just different tees.
That means I have to have the same amount of kids with the same amount of equal ability in both classes and guarantee that. If not, they're playing different courses, is what he's saying.
Right. That's right.
Well, obviously, Greg, what I say is we got one single accountability model in the state of South Carolina,
which I disagree with that model.
So the metrics are the same for every.
Of us can argue that it's a flawed system. So I mean that's not where I'm going with this.
Okay, where you going with it?
We started off talking about collaboration. We went all around the world.
Well,
You're saying accountability has created an era where others do not collaborate with one another because of the competitive nature of it.
Now once again, I never said that. I'm glad we have this recorded. I never said no one.
That's what he heard. That's not what you said, but that's what he heard.
That's what I heard. That's what I heard.
People collaborate less. I know everybody on here heard me say that, you can find instances where people collaborate, but this hyper accountability model has created less collaboration because people see themselves as in competition. Now,
and
Greg, you can have your own opinion, but you can have your own facts. That's not what I said.
Less where?
Less across the state. Like Barron said, there's less collaboration among principals in his district. There's less collaboration among principals across districts. There's less collaboration among superintendents across districts. There's less collaboration among teachers in different schools. So when you said where, you picked where.
So you made a point, JR, to talk about this hyper accountability creating the competitiveness. But one episode I want to come back and hopefully discuss what has created the hyper accountability system. And Barron hit on a few of those things when you talk about the economic development that schools are. What has created that? But it's going to go back to what I mentioned earlier. So that's a side note. When we talk about the hyper accountability system, but what has created that system? Just another discussion for another day, but I think it deserves being people understanding the redlining and those things that exist.
And Sean, I want you to put a pin in that, Sean, because that's a very important conversation. We're gonna follow up, but we gotta wrap up now. We probably have gone a little over time. We appreciate everyone for joining us for this last episode right here, and it was a fiery episode nonetheless. Of the executive session where we talk about collaboration and its competition versus collaboration, and rather this hyper accountability environment that we find ourselves in has negatively impact collaboration. Despite my good buddy Greg trying to read words, negatively impact collaboration. It was always as always, is a very exciting and very energetic conversation. Continue to share, like, with people who want to be a part of this dialogue. Continue to send us some information relative to topics you'd like to see us cover. Until next time, gentlemen, it has been a pleasure. You have a blessed day.
Provocative, insightful, empowering.
Kids don't have time for us to wait to get it together. They get one shot at school. Next year might be too late.
If you're a teacher, be courageous. If you're a school board member, be courageous. Because you know who the most courageous people in the school system? The children.
And are you going to stay true to who you are and what they've hired you to do?
The moment you think you have arrived and you don't need to do anything else, you are now falling behind. And it's time to pick the pace up.
The executive session is all about building leadership within you.
Regardless of whether you're an educator, you are a minister, a government official, or CEO of a corporation.
The executive session is the session for you.
Check us out and help us help you grow so that you too can help others.